a Monday morning. Thank you so much for choosing to wake up with us. We've already completed 1 hour of the show, 2 more to go, and we are delighted that you're here with us.
Yeah, I'm delighted you woke up, because a lot of people have been sleeping a little bit later, some because they didn't want to, because maybe their job's been put on hold, or others have just been saying, hey, it's summer, I need some rest. If we're up, you have to be up. We will set your alarm. Ainsley will set your alarm. She can figure out all the clock radios and to make sure you're up in the morning.
So this is your 7 a.m. wake-up call. Good morning. It's going to be a hot day here in New York City. Heat index near 100 degrees. Brian, I predict that by 9 o'clock we get that big wrench that the studio crew has, and we open that hydrant out front and just go running through it a couple
Are we allowed to do that?
Absolutely. Brian, have you been watching the news? Is anybody enforcing the rules? Hello.
Wow. And by the way, so then we're going to play stickball in the street with Willie Mays? I mean, it's going to be Back to the Future.
If you do that, Steve, you have to wear a mask.
Right. Exactly. And not just the catcher.
That's right. Okay, it is 7:01 on the East Coast, and we start with the Fox News alert. Officers blocked. Chris Christie over the weekend was defending the president for sending these federal troops to different cities, especially Portland. He sent those in to protect the federal courthouse there. Listen to Chris Christie, the former governor of your state, Steve, New Jersey.
Most Americans, George, do not believe that the riots that are happening in Portland and Seattle and in other places across the country that are causing destruction and injury and in some cases death are acceptable. Mayors in those towns are too politically timid to address people who are defacing and destroying their cities, then the President of the United States has to deal with it. It's his responsibility as president if the mayors are willing to walk away from their own responsibility, not to support peaceful protests, but to stop violent riots.
And it was good to see somebody stick up for the president over the weekend, because it's the federal government. You could watch cities burn and say I have nothing to do with it, or you could put people in action and say, how can I help it? And then so they might have overcorrected with people that really don't know what's going on. They just want to take part in the protest. Right. Let's bring in Arkansas GOP Senator Tom Cotton, member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Hey, Senator, you had one person over the weekend defend the president's action because he decided not to sit on his hands and watch, well, I don't know, 12, 15 cities burn.
Well, good morning, guys.
Morning.
The president has to take action to defend federal properties and installations. He ought not have to. Local mayors and governors should defend federal property the same way they defend private property, their own public property. But what you see in Portland is a systematic, deliberate, and ongoing attack on the federal courthouse and the federal building. Of course,
Portland, not only in vandalism and graffiti, but also the constant fires that they seem to start every night. Senator, we want you to try to decipher for us, if you would, what Congressman Jerry Nadler said on a Twitter video with a journalist by the name of Austin Fletcher, because he was asked about violence and Antifa, and he called it a myth. Watch this.
There's violence across the whole country. Do you disavow the violence from Antifa that's happening in Portland right now? There's riots.
That's a myth that's being spread only in Washington, D.C.
About Antifa in Portland?
Yes.
Sir, there's videos everywhere online. There's fires and riots. They're throwing fireworks at federal officers. DHS is there. Look online. It gets crazy, Mr. Nadler.
So, Senator, I can't tell if he is referring to the part of the sentence where the reporter says there's violence across the whole country. Is he calling that a myth, or is he calling the fact that Antifa is in Portland a myth?
Well, Jerry Nadler denying Antifa is in Portland is kind of like Baghdad Bob denying there were American tanks in Baghdad back in the day. I mean, you can just look at the videos that have been posted in recent weeks. I mean, people are carrying the flag of Antifa and wearing T-shirts and spray painting it on buildings. Obviously, that's not the only people in the streets in Portland, but there's no question that there are professional instigators and agitators on the streets in Portland who are trying to stir up violence. It's a sad situation that people who want to protest peacefully or demonstrate for any cause can't do so without these instigators and agitators trying to infiltrate their protests and use them for their own purposes.
So the Republicans are set to unveil the coronavirus bill, which will include $1,200 in stimulus checks, liability protections for businesses and schools. What else can we expect?
Well, Ainsley, I don't want to speculate on the legislation since it's not revealed yet, but I want to stress that in March, we did not know much about this virus. We did not know about the kind of impact it was going to have. That's why we unanimously passed the CARES Act. I would not have viewed that at the time as a recovery bill or even a stimulus bill. It was a survival bill. But now that we know so much more about this virus and its impact, now that we know about the economic impacts it had, we really need to have a bill that is much more finely targeted and calibrated towards the needs that we see today, like helping our schools and colleges and universities and businesses get open by protecting them from ambulance-chasing trial lawyers, or helping our doctors and hospitals and clinics get the supplies that they need to ensure that we are testing in sufficient speed and volume, and to focus aid on where it's truly needed on some of those industries and businesses that are most heavily impacted, that haven't been able to get to work, people who are still out of work through no fault of their own, through the fault only of the Chinese Communist Party. So that's what I expect you'll see in the bill today, and that's where our focus will be in the days ahead.
Senator Tom Cotton, you also, in the eye of the storm, you like to take on red-hot issues, including the 1619 Project. And here's part of your interview with the Arkansas Democratic Gazette. Quote, "We have to study the history of slavery and its role and impact on the development of our country, because otherwise we can't understand our country. As the founding fathers said, it was the necessary evil upon which the Union was built, but the Union was built in a way, as Lincoln said, to put slavery on the course to ultimate extinction." Some say that was insensitive.
Well, that is fake news, Brian. That's not what I said. What I said is that many founders believed that only with the Union and the Constitution could we put slavery on the path to its ultimate extinction. That's exactly what Lincoln said. Of course, slavery is a evil institution in all its forms at all times, in America's past or around the world today. But the fundamental moral principle of America is right there in the Declaration. All men are created equal. And the history of America is the long and sometimes difficult struggle to live up to that principle. That's a history we ought to be proud of, not the historical revisionism of the 1619 Project, which wants to indoctrinate America's kids and teach them to hate America, to believe that America was founded not on human freedom, but on racism, to think that slavery was not an aberration, but the true heart of America. That's why leading historians like James McPherson or Gordon Wood have debunked the 1619 Project. That's why I've introduced legislation to ensure that federal tax dollars don't go to teaching it. The New York Times should not be teaching American history to our kids.
Senator, before you go, today marks 99 days before the election day. What is the state of the race right now?
Well, I think it's a close race in the presidential campaign and the Senate campaigns as well. And the American people are going to be asking who is going to be best equipped to help get the economy back on its feet, who is going to protect our communities from the violence we see in the streets, who's going to protect this nation from the threat of the Chinese Communist Party and other threats abroad. And as we head down the home stretch of this campaign, I think that they'll conclude that it's the president and the Republican Party.
Senator, thank you for being with us.
Thank you all.
You're welcome. Good luck today. Okay, let's hand it over to Jillian. She has some headlines. As the nation debates how to reopen schools in the fall, some parents are rethinking their children's education with homeschooling pods. Lauren Simonetti from our sister network, Fox Business, is live with the new micro-schooling trend. Hey, Lauren.
Yeah, have you ever heard of this,
No.
Ainsley? It's pretty
I'm
interesting.
curious.
It's homeschooling in a pod. So essentially, you put kids in these co-ops of 4 to 12 in each pod, and you either have the parents teach the students or you hire a teacher. There's one company called Friendly Minds. It costs you $250 to get into the pod, and then up to $80 an hour to hire a teacher. So the kids stay in a garage, for instance, and then you rotate the families' homes that are hosting the school. So in that case, if a parent is working, they have more time where they can go to work because they're only hosting that pod, say, I don't know, once a week. So this is a hot trend, and a lot of people are actually doing this. Another trend that we've noticed is something called OutSchool. Have you heard of this? We do it all the time with my kids. It's about $10 a class, depending on the type of class, and it's a virtual supplement. So you can do anything from algebra to how to speak with a British accent. The kids love it. The classes are short. It's a supplement. So many parents are relying on supplements for their children because they're dissatisfied with what their kids learned in the past school year. 44% of parents dissatisfied with virtual education at the end of last year. So they're spending money on ways to teach their kids anew. The problem is all of these options cost money. So parents who have the ability to pay for the supplements might have kids that learn more. It's just something we're going to have to learn how to deal with. A lot of other parents are doing traditional homeschooling. In fact, it's estimated that the number of kids homeschooled entirely will more than double to 10 million this year. So homeschooling's not cut out for everybody, even if the parents do have the means and the schedules to do it. So anxiety is running very high right now on how we're getting the kids back to learning, whether it's in a traditional classroom or something else, Ainsley.
Yeah, we're all just, we have to do what we have to do, right? We don't have a choice. So whatever schools decide to do, we'll go with it. Thanks so much, Lauren.
And it's going to change a million times.
That's true. Thank you. Steve, over to you.
I think you're right. Meanwhile, while many cities are reporting a rise in COVID cases, some areas of the country might actually finally be showing signs of progress.
I mean, we already starting to see some plateauing in these critically 4 states that have really suffered under the last 4 weeks. So Texas, California, Arizona, and Florida, those major metros and throughout their counties.
Here with an update now, Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar. Mr. Secretary, good morning.
Hey, Steve, good to be with you.
Well, that's really good news. If the worst may be over in places like Florida and Texas, California, and Arizona, why is that?
Well, I just want to be careful that while Dr. Birx says we're seeing signs of plateauing, we're not out of the woods yet, and it's really important that people remain vigilant. We think it's due to the fact that people are actually wearing their masks. Yep. They're wearing their masks, they're social distancing, they're engaging in good personal hygiene. The governors have closed some of these bars where you just can't keep socially distant and you're not going to wear a face covering. So people are stepping up to the plate and doing what we're asking and what the governors are asking, and we see it has an impact.
Yeah, because every time they go, you know what, we're going to go to the next phase, or things are not as bad, or we're over the hump, people think, oh, it's over. I can kind of go back to my ordinary, regular life. And then you walk up to somebody with no mask, next thing you know, people have it.
Yeah, I really hope people will remain vigilant as we go through this, because we need to make it through the next several months, because we have so much promise there in terms of just really credible shots at therapeutics, the next generation of therapeutics, as well as vaccines. And we need to just all do our part so we can get to that point.
Speaking of therapeutics, Mark Meadows said yesterday that he's hopeful they can release coronavirus treatment news in the coming days. I would imagine that is about a treatment and not a vaccine.
Well, we've got news on both therapeutics and vaccines that we're working on. We continue aggressively to work on contracting to bring monoclonal antibodies and convalescent plasma to people as additional therapies on top of the remdesivir that President Trump has already gotten us, and steroid treatments for people with lung disease. And, you know, the president and I are going down to Research Triangle in North Carolina today, where he's going to get to see one of the 5 vaccines that we have invested in, get to see how those are manufactured. It's incredibly complex. I'm excited to go with him.
That should be a great day down there. You know, with Operation Warp Speed, with all the development of these therapeutics and the vaccines as well, some have suggested, you know, the political class is talking about how there could be an October surprise where the president is able to announce, you know what, we got a vaccine. I've delivered a vaccine, and that would help him politically.
Well, there's no politics in any of this. We need therapeutics and we need vaccines, and we need them as quickly as we can get them. And we are working to basically shave every day off the development and manufacturing that we can do, that we can do so. But we're going to make sure that any therapeutic or any vaccine is safe and effective up to the FDA's gold standards.
Well, that's what we want to hear. Finally, got to ask you about this. We we hear the president talk about testing, that we have so much testing, and that's true. Tests are available everywhere. The problem is the turnaround time is still, it's getting longer. I called one of the places yesterday in my town and I said, hey, I just saw this story. How long, if I came in today and got a coronavirus test, how long till I get the results? And they told me, we can have the results for you in 1 or 2 weeks.
Yeah, and that's an issue with about half of the tests that we do in the United States are through these commercial labs, and they're running at about capacity, although we had big advances last week where we approved those labs to do what's called pooled testing, where they can put 4 or 5 tests and run them together, so it really expands their capacity. But it's important to remember, half of the testing that we're doing is happening in state public health labs, hospitals, and point of care, and that's immediate or same day. So we're at about 4.27-day turnaround on average for those commercial labs.
Yeah.
That's longer than we'd like to see, but you're obviously, if that's the average, you're going to see outliers, and we don't want to see that. And so we're going to keep working to expand capacity, but also make sure testing is focused where it's really needed, those who are symptomatic, those who have been exposed or believe they may have it, and also to protect the most vulnerable. We're working to prioritize those cases.
Well, I'm just outside New York City. You would think that we would have a quicker turnaround. I asked one of the people, I said, what about these rapid tests? You know, I hear on the news about the rapid tests, and she said, oh, you can get one if you go to the hospital for something like a broken leg. So that's the only way I could get one, is to have a broken leg.
Well, a lot of hospitals will have those rapid tests because just like the flu or the strep test, it's some of the same equipment that does that. And so the facilities that have that equipment can actually do these point-of-care immediate tests. But what we're doing is we're surging all of the new point-of-care equipment that we're getting to the nursing homes because we want to make sure that they have that capacity for immediate testing there.
Understood. All right. Alex Azar, Secretary, thank you very much for joining us on this Monday.
Thank you, Steve.
Every day's a busy day for that guy. All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Meanwhile, still ahead, honoring an American hero. Late civil rights icon Congressman John Lewis will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol today. Lawrence Jones on Mr. Lewis's enduring legacy. Next.
We are back with a live look at Capitol Hill, where today late Congressman John Lewis will lie in state.
Lewis's celebration of life entering its 3rd day after a horse-drawn carriage pulled his casket across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama.
Steve Harrigan joins us live from Montgomery, Alabama, with more on today's services in Washington. Steve?
Steve, this is day 3 of a 6-day celebration of the life of John Lewis. He goes from Montgomery here to Washington, D.C. for a private ceremony inside the Capitol Rotunda. Then his remains will be taken outside for a public viewing. It was just minutes ago we saw that hearse pull out from the Capitol here in Alabama. So he is en route for an eventual burial in Atlanta on Thursday. The highlight of yesterday's events was, of course, the horse-drawn caisson, Lewis's flag-draped coffin, taken over the Edmund Pettus Bridge once again. That bridge became famous 55 years ago as the scene of Bloody Sunday. Back then, Lewis was leading 600 nonviolent protesters. They wanted voting rights. They were beaten by Alabama state troopers. Lewis himself suffered a fractured skull. It was that violence that really shocked a lot of people in the U.S. and sped up the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. There's a push now to rename that bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, after John Lewis. Pettus, of course, was a Confederate general in the Civil War and a leader in the Ku Klux Klan. Steve Ainsley Bryan, back to you.
Thank you so much, Steve. Let's bring in Fox News analyst and host of One Nation on Fox Nation, Lawrence Jones. Had an excellent special last night. We'll get to that in just a minute, Lawrence. But we wanted to ask you first about the life and legacy of John Lewis. How did that affect you, your family, and your life?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I used to be a young Dem, John Lewis was known as that advisor that understood the young people. You know, I eventually left the Democratic Party because of my frustration of them, with actually being affected by the issues of Black America. And John Lewis was one of those people that said, you know, I was one of those young people at one time as well. Him and MLK had their little back and forth when it came to his speech, but it also the different views on what needed to be done. And so he really sympathized with young people on that. And this is a guy that I keep telling people, he wasn't a weak man. This was a guy that was forceful. He was beaten and still was peaceful and was willing to work across the aisle. And so I hope as we're having these conversations about race in America and how do we move the country forward, that we do it in the spirit of John Lewis, because this is a man that was also very critical of the violence that's happening today, but he also wanted action. And I think his call for unity is also important. But never mistake his call for unities for also accepting the status quo. He wanted change, but he wanted it to be done the right way.
And compare it to what we're seeing now. Now we see a situation where the cops they overstepped the bounds. They fractured his skull, and the way they would beat on those crowds and make the unwarranted arrests made it be clear who the bad guy was. Now we have a situation where city after city is in the middle of turmoil and civil unrest, and the cops are being targeted, and the aggression is on the side of mostly white protesters throwing Molotov cocktails, and now it's almost organized in their attacks, from dropping off bricks to bats to frozen bottles on down. Somehow that message got lost in the last few decades.
Yeah, the sad part is that the message didn't get lost. It was the people that are lost. The fact that they hijacked the movement is kind of disgusting, to have a bunch of individuals that really don't care about black lives. Let's just be clear. They don't care about the movement. They're not trying to have a conversation between the community and the police. These are people that are anarchists that took advantage of a time where the country was uniting and having difficult conversations, and they made it about them. And I've seen protests. I've been covering this stuff since Trayvon Martin. Okay, I've been on the ground. It is the same group in every city, and they take advantage of these moments. They're willing to burn it down because they don't live in these cities. That is not the people that are from these communities that are having tough conversations, and that was reflective in my reporting last night on One Nation. I wanted to show all angles of the Bay. When the state abuses their power, they should be held accountable. But when citizens terrorize communities, they got to be held accountable too. It's amazing that people cannot get that sentiment.
That is a perfect setup, Lawrence, for your ride-along. It was an exclusive. You were there with the officers one evening in Camden, New Jersey, with the police department. Here he is from One Nation.
So where we're going now is in the North Camden. When I became a cop in 1991, North Camden was the most challenged section of the city. Yeah. By far the most violent. It's like every other corner you had, it was open-air drug dealing. So it's
drugs was the biggest problem.
Yes, we really have been able to change the dynamic doing community policing.
What do you mean when you say community policing?
For us, it's a culture. From myself all the way down to our newest recruit, it's about being part of the community. As simple as going back to like the 50s and 60s, how a cop walked the beat.
Lawrence, it's tough to be an officer these days.
It's tough, and, you know, that's why I want to be there on the ground. You know, I'm so grateful for our bosses giving me the opportunity to navigate this difficult conversation. In order to have this conversation, and I say this with so much respect to the media that's out here, you cannot do this from a studio. You have to talk with the people on the ground. If you're going to talk about the protesters, go down there and talk with the protesters. Yeah. If you're going to talk about the cops, go to the cops and see what they do every single day. If you want to navigate this, you got to actually know what the parties do, what they stand for, and you got to see the bad apples, but you also got to highlight the good officers that do their job respectful every single day. And I hope people saw that in One Nation last night.
Yeah, you can watch the whole thing on Fox Nation tonight. You can sign up today and get your first month for just 99 cents. Lawrence, it was excellent. And if you didn't watch it last night on Fox News Channel, you got to go on Fox Nation and watch it. And he also goes out. I liked it when you went to those guys, we've interviewed them before, that have the T-shirts that say, black or white, come have a beer with us and sit in our lawn chair. And you went to go hang out with them in their front yards. It was really cool.
I brought them beer. I had to bring them Texas beer, of course, but I brought them.
You can come to my house.
Shiners.
Yeah.
Shiners.
Hey, Lawrence, trust me, even though it was for a good cause, you still can't write it off.
Yeah.
I had the same thing when I tried to expense the beer, tell them it's part of the job. It's still not going to work. They're not going to reimburse you.
Thank you, family. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Hey, let's go up to Janice Dean, who never drinks beer when she's on location.
No, never. I cannot tell a lie. So let's take a look at the weather, shall we? Because we've had a very busy season already in the tropics. We are watching Hurricane Douglas. The Hawaiian Islands were really lucky. They just scraped by from a landfalling hurricane, moving well a little bit north of the island, still bringing the potential for heavy rain, strong winds and storm surge and the flash flooding threat, but it's almost over, thank goodness. And then we had Hurricane Hannah that made landfall this weekend across South Texas, still flash flood warnings as the remnant low moves in towards Mexico. We have the potential for showers and thunderstorms as well as some severe storms along the Gulf Coast. And it's monsoon season, so the flash flooding potential for parts of the Four Corners in towards the central U.S. throughout the day today. The other big story we are watching is the heat, but I also want to point your attention to this area of low pressure. This is going to be our next named storm in the next day or so. Isaias is the name of this one, and we're going to have to watch it carefully because it looks like the computer models are showing a brush perhaps with the East Coast sometime next week. So a lot of time to watch this storm as it moves closer towards the East Coast. And then it's summertime, right? The hottest temperatures of the year for parts of the East Coast, feeling like well over 90 to 100 degrees. So just keep that in mind along the East Coast.
Hot time, summer
Steve
in the
Ainsley,
city.
Brian?
All right, JD, thank you very much.
Back to you.
Indeed. All right, still ahead. First, it was Elon Musk's Tesla. Well, now Joe Rogan making the big move to Texas as well. So why are more and more people uprooting for life in the Lone Star State? We're going to talk to a former...
Texas attracting two big names. Podcast host Joe Rogan explaining why he's making the move from Los Angeles.
I just want to go somewhere in the center of the country, somewhere it's easier to travel to both places, and somewhere where you have a little bit more freedom. Also, I think that where we live right here in Los Angeles is overcrowded. When you look at the economic despair, when you look at the homelessness problem that's accelerated radically over the last 6, 7, 10 years, I think there's too many people here. I think it's not tenable.
This coming just days after Elon Musk announced that Tesla will build its largest auto plant near Austin. So what is it about the Lone Star State that is drawing them all in? Here now is a former California assemblyman who left the Golden State for Texas, Chuck DeVore. Hey, Chuck.
Hey, good morning, Ainsley.
Good morning. So he's going to save a lot of money. We know that because there's no state tax in Texas, which was a benefit when I lived there, too. What do you think about this? What's your reaction?
Well, I think it all comes down to what Joe Rogan said, a little bit more freedom in Texas. I mean, sure, after the Spotify contract that he signed, he'll probably save in excess of $13 million in state tax by moving from California to Texas. But it's not just the taxes. I mean, look at what's going on in California right now and really in this moment in history around the U.S. Joe Rogan is in the entertainment industry. He's in the ideas industry. And what you have now is this stultifying conformity that demands that everybody speak and think the same. And here's Joe Rogan, right? He supported Ron Paul. He supported Bernie Sanders, but he likes Donald Trump more than he likes Joe Biden, and he likes his Second Amendment gun rights. I mean, how does a guy like that even get along in L.A. anymore? So he's welcome to Texas, right? Y'all come on down to Texas.
Come on down. So Ted Cruz said about 6 days ago, he said, if the Democrats win Texas, it's all over. Do you worry about Californians and people from these other blue states coming down?
Well, I know that that's a big concern, but we've done some testing, poll testing at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And what we've found, and this comports with other polls we've seen as well, is that generally it's the conservative-minded people that are leaving places like California and Illinois and New York and moving to Texas for, as Joe Rogan said, a little bit more freedom.
Oh, really? Because living in New York, I'm from the South. I know so many people who will stop me here and say, we love Charleston, we love this place, the Outer Banks. We're thinking about moving down there because everyone is so nice. Do you ever hear that too?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you're going to have all kinds of people move here, but generally speaking, it's a big commitment if you go from a liberal urban area to a conservative southern state. And so, yeah, of course, a few liberals move in, but on balance, it's the conservatives. And you know, one of the reasons why, look at our cities right now. Many of them are on fire. And you know what the common thread is with this urban violence, with the looting and the arson? It's these leftist progressive mayors who are sympathetic to the violence and a governor that is also sympathetic and doesn't send in the National Guard to stop it. I ran an analysis and found that the more a city voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, the greater the looting and arson in that city. It's one of the reasons why in Texas we haven't seen the sort of scale of looting and violence that you see in places like Portland and Seattle and even Los Angeles. I've heard from Hollywood friends that are scared of what's going on in Los Angeles right now. They had riots and violence only a quarter mile from their house.
So, real
Absolutely,
quickly,
they allow
do you
it.
love Texas?
I love Texas. Thank God that there was a Lone Star State to which to move.
All right, well, you've got 2 new neighbors coming down. Thanks so much for being with us. Coming
Thank
up,
you.
You're welcome. Coming up, we have Peter Navarro and Congressman Dan Crenshaw.